Welcome to Season 4 of the Knack for Business podcast.
Question of the audience. Why does your business keep hitting the same ceiling, no matter how hard you push? That's the core problem our guest dives into. Leaders trying to grow with old assumptions, old language, and old systems that simply can't produce new outcomes. In this episode, he breaks down how paradigm shifts are actually engineered, why creating the right problems unlocks breakthrough performance, and how CEOs, founders, and business owners can transform chaos into rapid growth. Our guest today is Ted Santos from Turnaround IP. He's the CEO of Turnaround Investment Partners and a leadership disruptor known for helping CEOs and executives create breakthroughs in the middle of chaos. He's the mind behind the disruptive leadership model, a framework that trains leaders to create problems on purpose, the kind that spark innovation, transformation, and rapid growth. Throughout his career, Ted has taken struggling companies and turned them into market leaders using unconventional strategies that have doubled productivity and shattered long-standing growth ceilings. His work extends beyond business performance. His book, Here's Why You Can't Find Love, exposes how personal struggles like broken relationships quietly drain more than 300 billion from US businesses each year and offers leaders practical tools to fix the hidden issues that hold them back. Ted brings bold ideas, counterintuitive insights, and real world strategies that empower high achievers to think bigger, act bolder, and lead through disruption with confidence. Ted, absolute pleasure to.
They'll hate you. And I do like that quote because my work really does revolve around thinking as opposed to making people think they are thinking or believe they are thinking.
You know what? I can understand that we hosted a special event and we try to have ice breaking questions and but without them seeming like, it starts the process rolling, getting the person to get the juices flowing in the right direction. So I totally get that. Not that they're giving us the evil hairy eyeball when we say, so what makes your day a happy day? Yeah. So, when did you first realize that, you weren't meant to lead inside the system, but to disrupt it? Because that's a bit of a that's a change. Like, when you talk about leaders going, "Hi, lead this group of people through this path," and this is you're doing disruption. And so, what triggered that, and what does that look like?
Well, let's see. You said, when did I think I could lead outside of it? I probably when I came home from work I'm from school in the first grade and told my mother I corrected the teacher today. She made an error and I corrected her. My
And how
mother
did
said,
that
please.
go?
Well, the teacher was fine, but my mother said, please don't do that anymore. But apparently I didn't listen because even in college, I remember especially a business communication class, and the teacher would read stuff to the class. And after a while, she became accustomed to my questions or corrections. And I remember on more than one occasion, she would read and then say, Mr. Santos, can I continue going or do you want to correct me? And sometimes I would say, you can continue. Or other times I would say, well, there is a question here. And you said, I wasn't always, it wasn't that I was difficult. I was just almost looking at a different world.
When you're looking at a different world, like. And it's really cool to be able to do that, right? It's like someone saying, "Hi, look at this number laying on the floor." If it's a 6, you're standing in one perspective, and if it's a 9, you're standing in the other perspective. How do you describe your perspective that's different, let's say, than the average leader? What are the kind of the key elements that give you that new insight, that gives you more depth and breadth?
Well, it's not that I went around saying I have a different perspective. It was others who said, why do you always have to be so different? To me, I was just being normal. I had questions. And it probably that started at also at a very young age, 6 years old, still first grade. And I saw my mother run with two broken legs. And I didn't know it at the time. There was a car accident. She took us, there were three children at the time, took us to a New Year's Eve party at her mother's, and my father didn't join us. And I guess about 100 yards from home, the car is wrapped around a tree. I look to my mother, and she's not in the driver's seat. And I look up, and she's running home. And later, I learned in the hospital that she had two broken legs. And that left me with the thought that people have this capacity in them. Human beings are capable of doing extraordinary. We just don't know how to get to it. So I start researching, uh, women lifting cars off of their children, people doing these things. And at 9, I start researching human behavior. At 11, I start training, working out to build an athletic body. And I did break records in all of my sports, but I, I was always going like, I was reaching in myself for this whatever that was that had my mother run with broken legs, I was after that. So as an athlete, that is the way I trained, and when I found myself running businesses, I still had that same mindset. So perhaps the short answer to your question is seeing my mother run with broken legs told me that people have something, the human beings have something really special, and running with broken legs is not something that you go around saying I'm going to do. So that would probably have given me a very different perspective than most people.
It says here you got a scholarship as a drummer. And I was thinking about creatives, and I was thinking specifically about drummers, whether it's the Rolling Stones or whether it's the Eagles or a few other famous drummers. Is there something about drumming that makes people live and think outside the box?
No, but there's something about playing the drums for 8 straight hours on a lot of occasions, and I never thought anything of it, but when I started hearing about other people who became, high performers and playing an instrument, that there was the same pattern. They could just sit there for 8 hours and play their instrument. So in 8 hours, you practice technique, you play to songs, you practice music, reading music, and it was easy for me. I can remember my family would go somewhere, and hours later, they would come home, and I was still when they left, I was playing, and when they came home, I was still playing. I would only stop to get a drink of water, go to the bathroom, but on many occasions, I would play for 8 straight hours. So, that kind of commitment is what's required to do things really well in anything. And I even remember especially my senior year of high school playing football, I'd go to football practice and then come home and practice. I remember once asking my brother, "Come on, let's go in the back," because in the back of our house, there was a slight hill, and I wanted as a running back, I wanted to practice running plays up the hill with my brother, and he wouldn't, so I just did it by myself, and that's after and my brother said no because he said, "I want to do other things in life besides just play football." So he had friends. He had a lot of friends, and he wanted to go play with his friends, and I wanted to practice. So that same being a drummer, that kind of mindset of training, and there was still that running with broken legs, still that, "How do I do this in a way that it's never been done?" kind of mindset.
You mentioned that leaders have to create problems on purpose. So to find a solution, or they're just jammed, maybe it's log jammed, and you just have to kind of like break the routine. Is that effective? Is that how much problem do you create to instigate change for better outcomes?
So it's really not about solutions, and I can see why someone would say that. If you're the CEO and you are not intentionally creating problems, you should be fired or retrained immediately. That's your job. It's not something you do in order to fix something. That's your job. And speaking of job, we had a guy named Steve Jobs who was very good at intentionally creating problems.
Is it
Imagine he
is it a
says, "Go ahead, is it a what?"
Is it and no, I apologize for interrupting. Is it a problem or a challenge?
See, this is we live in a world that has problems with the word problem. So they people always ask me, reframe it. So here is what happens. When I say you intentionally want to create problems, people want to run for the hills. They don't want no one wants a problem. In fact, our whole education system revolves around not being a problem. Good what is it? Good boys do fine and music, every good boat does float. So there are so many ways in nursery rhymes that encourage us to be good boys and girls, and you don't create problems. You don't correct the teacher. So when you were talking about paradigm shifts, how do you create paradigm shifts if your only way of operating is within the paradigm that says don't create problems?
Is that more and just I'm just thinking back, and I get what you're saying. And I get why you would create a problem, ask a question, is that right? But if you're, say, if you're in a manufacturing assembly line, right? You want, widget comes
Right.
off the belt over here, buddy touches it and does whatever that person has to do. It goes to the next person. All has a sequence and flow. If that sequence and flow is disrupted, it causes in the overall production a bit of a disharmony. And it almost sounds like you need the disharmony to get out of almost like you're in an endless loop trap, right? You're never going to have an improvement out of that. Would that be a fair enough way to describe this?
No. So most people work really hard to understand what I'm saying through that which they already understand. So imagine, you guys know who Robert Goddard is?
For the name.
Aeronautics engineer. Right out of DC, there is an Goddard Airspace or something like that. So in the 1920s, Robert Goddard said, "One day man will fly to the moon." And the New York Times, very credible media source, wrote an article about Goddard saying that he was basically an idiot and didn't have the intelligence of a child. And in 1969, they had to write another article to apologize. So in the 1920s, they were attempting to understand what he was saying through that which they already understood. And the Wright brothers had just recently, within 20 years, created or took advantage of the laws of aerodynamics with a flying machine. And now this guy is talking about flying to the moon. The other problem we had was if you look at automobiles manufactured in the early 90s, all of those cars had a top speed of 40 miles an hour. Do you guys know why?
Because you die. You there was a belief that wait, your skin would fall off? I remember it, but I don't know. Tell us.
So I've read two different sources. One, they thought the human body would explode, and another one, they said a woman's uterus would explode. So they didn't think the human body could withstand that. So yes, you would die. So here we are. We're just just breaking that paradigm of 40 miles an hour. Now this guy's talking about flying to the moon. These just seem like impossibilities, and under people who just, we just in the 20s Ford created the assembly line, which made the automobile costly enough for most people to purchase one. So, how do we go from riding horses to the moon? Just seems impossible. So, it a lot of times that's what it sounds like when I'm talking. There was this paradigm of transportation. You get on a horse and you ride. And now Ford says, well, you don't need a horse. In fact, Ford said, if I would have asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So he didn't ask them. Steve Jobs was kind of like that also. He said, people don't know what they want. So if you're talking about widgets and assembly line, manufacturing. Before Henry Ford stepped in, the automobile took 9 months to build. If he would have just left that alone, but he completely disrupted that. But his disruption wasn't about disrupting the assembly line. His disruption was in service to a future that he declared, and the future he declared was most households will own an automobile. How do you do that? If the automobile was $1,500 and only 2% of the population could afford that, well, how do you go from 1,500 to something that people can afford? I think it was by 1927, the price of an automobile was like $247, and Ford had 60% of the market share. So he went from an 800, 850 down to 650, all the way down to $200. But he did that. So it's this future that he creates that says most households will own an automobile shaped his actions. So to accomplish that, what are the things that we need to put in place to actually make that a reality? So it's no different than a guy, God, I can't believe I just forgot his name. It's like right there. And Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile in 1956 because he said, "We'll do it." And now his
Everyone does it.
actions and or hell, there's a guy, a 15-year-old in I think New Zealand who broke it. So that would seem impossible. And there's a woman running like 401, 402s, and she'll eventually break it. So Roger Bannister did that in the face of people saying it's humanly impossible. It's no different than Roger Goddard saying, "We'll send a man," or Robert Goddard saying, "We'll send a man to the moon." Two things that seem impossible, but they were complete paradigm shifts. And then, as you just said, Wayne, lots of people run under 4 minutes. The world record is 3:43. How is that? They didn't change the distance of the mile. How does it go from humanly impossible to run under 4 minutes to being 3:43?
I understand being parachuted into a company, and so I sense some problems are there, so I'm going to fix them and be a hero. If I have what I think is a smooth running ship, I don't even want you in my office, let alone talking to my people. Tell me that story. How do you get them convinced that they should even do this if it sounds like it's going to cause them stress and drama?
What you just described is a company headed for obsolescence. Everything is great the way it is. Don't bother it. We've got a horse and buggy. We're just fine. I'm running a mile in 4 minutes flat. I'm just fine. That's what those conversations create. But when someone says we're going to create, look at the founding fathers declaring independence. Well, how do you create your own company that's independent from its mother company? And you're just colonies. That's a big thing. That's really putting your butt on the line. It's a very different mindset to be able to say, this is the future to which I'm committed. And then to go forward with the actions required to make it a reality. Most people are okay with the way things are. So when you talk about a paradigm shift, you're not stuck with the way things are. And it's not making an improvement because those are not the same worlds. So sometimes people want to ask me questions about the difference between a manager and a leader. A good manager controls what occurs in time and space. And to go from being a good manager to a leader, there's a transformation that happens. So good managers control what occurs in time and space. When they transform to a leader, they disrupt what occurs in time and space.
So is disruption then like what research and development be part of it? Maybe more of the tool because you have to understand, where you want to head in the research and development team, right? Because if you have a finite amount of resources, unless of course you're a large company, or even if you think of in the U.S. DARPA, I think that would be the best epitome of we're outside the box, boys. In fact, the box is no longer a box; it's a bubble, and even then, it's not even that anymore. Right? So, that forward thinking. How do you get people to is it because that their finances or they're hitting a doldrum or they're hitting a ceiling and that's it, and they wanna do more, but they're not? Or is it a competition kinda honing in on them? If we go to the, horse and buggy, well, all of a sudden, Buddy's showing up with Clydesdales, right? Versus,
Right,
you got an Arabian stallion. There's 2 different horses, 2 different functional tasks. And
right.
then, motorcycle, bicycle. How do you kind of go, okay, I need to go motorized. What does that look like, right? How do I kind of pare it down? Do I go to a human powered bicycle? I'm going to light a propane tank in the back end and go like a rocket. Like all of a sudden, because all of a sudden the options get really big. Like when Goddard says this, we're going to the moon. So the construct to go there is there. The delivery of that sometimes might be a bit of what are our next steps? What should we be doing to build that path? Is that part of what you're doing then when you're working with the company?
That's a great question. How much research could Goddard have done to fly to the moon? Like, tell me about how do you research that?
Well, yeah, you have to have at least one world war because that's where the rockets came from, apparently. Yeah, from the European theater, right? So that's where some of the not that other people weren't making rockets, but some of that came from that space. The fact that you had to toss things in the air to hit a target far away, so those are two elements. I don't think Goddard was looking for World War II. I think Goddard was looking. There's going to be a propulsion system to get us there, right? Whatever it looks like.
Well, most people don't know was the Germans who were working really hard to fly to the moon in the 1930s.
I do not know.
That's how the rocket came about. And you can't
There we go.
imagine how much technology. That's how they came up with jet propulsion and rockets. They did that.
Did they make you eat alone at Christmas parties? That's what I noticed. I'm not being facetious. Like, if I could see you being the most disliked man in the office.
Wayne's gonna send you
That's
flowers
funny.
after this. So, by the way,
I have some guys from college stopped inviting me to the parties. Sure. I remember being at, we were in Brooklyn, a guy's house, basketball came on and there was a group of guys there. I had never met these guys and we started talking about some things and they started asking me questions and I had answers. And the guy who lived there said, if you guys don't stop talking while the game is on, I'm putting you all out. So please shut up. And shortly after, I was no longer invited to his, gatherings at his homes. These happen. My family loves me. They, uh, they, they have made comments. I've made some serious investments, and they're like, that doesn't make sense. Like equities and precious metals. I've done things that were outside of what was normal. Yes.
I almost think this, as you're describing this, right, and things that are flashing through my mind right now are it's the creative element, almost like an artist, right? Except yours is not the canvas, yours is not the book. It's the action of doing something. Right? It's some art, even if you look at music, right? What was played in the 1600s, although you can play it now, it ain't the same,
Right.
right? So it's evolved, it's adapted and
Right.
adjusted. How do you get people to do one of the things I understand, you can fire hose somebody with a change and they'll go, "Oh my gosh, no." Goddard moon, is a good example, right? But how do you get them to go on the path where it's the moon, it's getting there. Now you just gotta you kind of turn their head a little bit more, let them progress and turn their head a little bit more and progress till they go light bulb. How do you get them there?
Well, people already presuppose their limits and then they project it on to other people. So if you already know what you can't do before you've even engaged, or I did it once and it didn't work the way I wanted, so now I have proof that doesn't work. And people get stuck with that. And then there are others around them. So people have it's almost like there are all these conversations that we inherit and we just don't question them. We trust the people who give them to us. The earth is the center of the universe, and that's just the way it is. And then they say it is what it is. And then a guy named Copernicus says, "Excuse me, uh, no, I did some calculations and it turns out the sun is the center and the earth goes around the sun with the other planets." Yeah, I don't think so. Someone get rid of the guy. And that's what
Yeah.
happened. So we may think, oh, we do not live in that environment any longer. So one day, if that's what happened in the early 1400s, fast forward 600 years from now, they'll look back at us and say, "Wow, they had prisons? How barbaric." You had divorces? Like, wow, were you guys, like, incompetent? You didn't know, like, humans didn't know how to engage one another? Like, what were you guys doing back then? So they'll look back at us and you had wars? Why? Why did you have a war? They'll look at us and think we were insane. We can't see that because we believe it is what it is. Like, you were unhappy? Like, how could you ever be unhappy? Happiness is like air. If you stop breathing, you don't have access to air. That's the only way you don't have access to happiness. So,
Okay, let's have a corporate moment. Can you tell us about a company that got turned around, but based on you planting seeds and that you brag about?
well, so it's not planting seeds, it's disrupting what I just said. So it's working with people and providing tools for them to discover these limiting beliefs that they have and never questioned. They are generally there's so many things that happen in event. I'll give you an example of a guy, a really smart guy. When I met him, he was about 62 years old. He was a CPA by profession, one of the largest CPA firms in the country, and then one day decided to change professions and went into the mortgage industry. And he started out doing okay, and then he hit a slump and he couldn't get out of it. So when he meets me, I'm training him in my what I call a mindset. Uh, it's a mindset technology. I'm no expert in the mortgage industry, but I work in a lot of different industries, so it's not difficult for me to catch on. And I've been a chief operating officer in more than one organization, so I understand business and leadership. So I have this guy who's underperforming, and he's going to work every day expecting to be fired. And he worked with me for 6 months. In the first 3 months, he doubled his productivity. In the next 3 months, he doubled that. So if he started out with two, after 3 months, he was doing four. And after 6 months, he was doing 8 units. That's just, that's how he was performing. And so imagine he went from expecting to being fired to now his company says, hey, buddy, whatever you need additional resources, support, we'll give it to you. And he had three of his competitors courting him, and he eventually took another job. But to your question, what was holding him back? So this guy said he could get meetings with people he called heavy hitters, which meant investors to sell mortgages. And he'd be at the table with heavy hitters. And he was a master at breaking the ice. And he'd make a joke, everyone would laugh, and they're comfortable with him. And then he'd make another joke and, he's, wow, it's a great guy. And people would want to talk a little business and he'd talk a little business and then make another joke and another joke. And he'd basically joke himself out of a deal. Everyone would leave the table wanting to have a beer with him and be his buddy, but they wouldn't do business with him. So what was behind that? One day, one event, and it shaped his mindset forever. So when he was 13, he was in a backseat of a car with older guys, 17, 18, and one of the guys said, "What's this little kid doing with us?" And he makes a joke. Everyone laughs, put their arm around him and said, "You're a cool guy." So he was able to hang with older guys because he knew how to be the funny guy. That became kind of like his superpower. And if you put him in an environment where he questioned whether or not he belonged, that was his way to survive in that situation. So when you put him at the table with heavy hitters and he doesn't see himself as one, he goes right back to being a 13-year-old. So at 13, he made this decision to never be in a situation where he didn't belong. So he just automatically went to making jokes and he couldn't stop himself because that was the only gear he had. Once he could distinguish that that one event happened and he made this decision in a matter of seconds. He didn't process anything in seconds. He said, I won't let this happen again. And he had a way for dealing with it, and it was the icebreaker guy. So, because being an icebreaker is actually good, we didn't want to destroy that. We disrupted it in such a way he wasn't stuck with it. So, whenever he saw that that was all he had, he could actually stop and get clear about why he was at the table with someone. And we developed strategies, sales strategies, and the questions to ask so he could better understand his prospect and close the deal. And that's how he was able to double productivity over and over. So if you look at that from a microcosm, that's basically what I'm doing with human beings. When I go in and I'm working with the CEO, I'm working with the executive team or the entire division or company, I'm taking everyone. And it's very interesting doing it with one person. It's so eye opening. But when you do it as a team, it creates this bond amongst the team that's just incredible. And then they all have tools. So going back to the case of the guy in the mortgage industry, in his head, he made up this story about how he did not belong because someone asked. So you put him with heavy hitters. That story runs almost like it's a radio station he cannot turn off. It just runs. You don't belong here. What do you do when you don't belong? And, people don't even hear those conversations except they're happening. So when you're working with people in an enterprise and you give them this breakthrough initiative that disrupts them and leaves them not the fear of being out the box or out the bubble or even out of their comfort zone, what people are left with is, I'm not competent in this breakthrough initiative. And if we take this on, because I'm not competent, I'm not going to look very good. Maybe I'll lose my job. So we destroyed the initiative. We just spend 2 weeks figuring out or researching. This is when people research. We research to prove this breakthrough initiative will never work. It's never going to work. Look, we did all the research. But what it does is it saves the day, and they don't have to worry about looking incompetent in this domain, in this new paradigm where they may not be very competent. So when you can have people uncover and discover those limiting beliefs, those conversations they're having with themselves, they now have a power of choice. Back to the mortgage industry. Do I want to keep saying I don't belong here, or do I want to choose what I'm committed to accomplishing with these heavy hitters? But before you have distinctions for those limiting beliefs, the conversations that play like a radio station, you can't do anything about it because you don't even know it's happening. So it's not about awareness. You're aware the event happened. You don't have the distinctions for what you said to yourself when the event occurred.
So you have this guy, you help him out. You say, "Listen, you're really good at breaking the ice, but stop."
No,
First off,
no,
how long does not stop, I shouldn't say it, but don't keep doing breaking the ice. Break the ice and then shift gears, right?
nope, nope. No, I don't give instructions. Not like that. No.
No, but like, how do you get them if you're having a transformation and let's say I'm standing here and you
Right.
go, okay, what do you how do you give maybe not instructions, but how do you guide the person? Whatever you can define it however you want, whether you're using a shock collar, which I don't think you're doing, a hand gesture. What is the technique then that and you because you're trying to get the person to understand it, right? And I get it. So if they learn it, it stays with them, right? It's like doing martial arts. It's one thing to try it out. You got to do repetition makes better, et cetera, and train other people and so forth. Is that the same idea? Or how do you convey that how do you convey that migration from what you were to what you should be or can be?
Okay, so you have to imagine, I didn't know this guy was in the back of a car when he was 13.
I was
I
gonna
wasn't
ask you
even
that question. That's pretty in depth. That'd be a therapist moment there, man.
right, right. The guy was much older than me, so there's no way for me to know that. So I don't give people direction. I ask questions and they discover it. And then we look at the impact that it has. So if you don't know that one situation is impacting you, there's nothing you can do about it. You're just aware that it happened. But once you start distinguishing how it's shaping the actions you take or restricts your actions, then we work, like I said, we worked on the other side. Here, we're going to now develop strategies for you to navigate a conversation with heavy hitters so you can uncover what they need. And here's how you close the deal. Now, when he gets into the situation, he hears the 13-year-old conversation flaring up. And it's like, okay, that's not why I'm here. And it's like I said, he also sees, well, that's a story. So it's kind of like this. I'm gonna walk you guys through something. If the three of us are walking down a beach and we see a sign and it's a gate, it's a fence, and it says, beyond this point for the next 100 meters, this is a minefield. And the three of us have to get to the other side of that minefield. What are you guys going to do?
I'm gonna let him go ahead of me.
First, it's only good to the first pop, and then after that, it's you, bud.
I guess I'll just get a beach chair and sit down and watch the fireworks.
Yeah, so a problem is presenting
Well, no, no,
itself.
no, no, no. But I really want to have this conversation with the two of you. It's not done. I asked what are you going to do?
Oh no,
You have to get to the other
oh no,
side.
no, no.
So you're going to walk
Well,
through and you're gone. Okay.
no, life will be short if we just kind of saunter through. I mean that's a bit of a Russian
Right.
roulette, and not the game plan. To the moon, Alice, to the moon. Not the
Right.
way I want to go.
So what do you do?
So can I go around it?
No. And if you go in the water, you can see those sharks. They're just waiting. They love
Uh,
people. who- And so to the left there are sharks. To the right, there's just nothing. We can't. There's a wall. We can't get over it. We have to go through this line. We need to get to the other side. There's just no question, no doubt about it.
well, that assumes how far is. I guess the next question would be how long is the distance between entry point to exit point without going kaboom?
One 100 yards.
So
That's what the
trebuchet.
sign says for the
Well,
next 100 yards.
one trebuchet later, we'll just fly over it.
Yeah, the helicopter's in the shop. Out of order. Sorry.
Oh, no, the trebuchet, I don't excuse me, the helicopter is good. Actually, the helicopter is safer than the trebuchet, though. Uh,
Ted, we would
Okay.
tell us.
how would you get through?
Okay.
How
So
would
okay. So if I say to you guys, I have thousands of hours of training for distinguishing mines in the land. Even though they are covered, there's perturbance in the land, but it's so subtle that you just hard to see. If they bury it too deep, it doesn't matter. You'll walk right on it and it won't explode. So they bury it deep, but not too deep. And I can see I have distinctions for where they are. And wow, and I'll tell you, these guys are pretty smart. They put 3 right there at the entrance, so you wouldn't even make it in. I see them. So here's my training is not only to distinguish mines in the minefield, I can uncover them and dismantle them. So if you guys follow my footsteps, I'm going to point where they are, I'll dismantle them, and we'll walk right through for the whole 100 yards. Are you guys going with me?
Well, I'm trying to wondering what's so important the other side of that minefield that I want to get there. But obviously, the minefield's there for a reason, right? And so, if that is a skill set that you have, and
Right,
you can see a disturbance or a tell in the lay of the land
right.
that are indicators, and you're leading the way, why wouldn't we follow you?
Good, good. So that's analogous to my work. People have minds in their mind and they have no way of seeing them. So I have thousands of hours in training for distinguishing where the minds are, but I just need to know what questions to ask, then to train them to unlearn them. Like we reverse engineer them and unlearn them. Before that, something happens back with the guy in the mortgage industry. He gets into the room with certain people and the mind explodes, and the only way to deal with it is to be a funny guy. There are lots of stories that I have about people, and these are, CEOs in their 50s with Ivy League education. None of that makes you immune to it. Like we're being our 5-year-old, our 13-year-old. And that's who runs the show, and it happens because there's one event. So, because I have distinctions, like I know where these minds are, there are questions that I know to ask that helps the client uncover it themselves, and then we reverse engineer so they see the impact, but they also see that they had an interpretation at 5 years old that they are still living with as though it's real. So that's the part you want to unlearn.
Do you have a book that can unpack any of this for us, or series of books?
Good question. So in my book, it's called Here's Why You Can't Find Love. I actually take what we're talking about and I insert it into something that everyone can understand, which is intimate relationships. My assumption is most people have had one, if not all, by a certain age. So I'm talking about these kinds of things. And the book is not just me doing like a TED talk, even though I am TED. The book is 5 women interviewing me. So it's an extremely dynamic back and forth. Like, hey, Ted, you're a guy. How could you say that? And so very much a discovery. The book reads like a workshop.
And it's available where?
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and also inside Barnes and Noble brick and mortar stores. Any
So,
electronic bookstore.
Ted, what is your reach? Like, your clients hail from just continental U.S., North America, global?
I don't know. I've never worked trying to think, was it Canada? No, it's only been in the US, throughout the US. Yes.
Okay. And so, if someone is curious, even if they're from Canada, how would someone get a hold of you? And what's the best rate?
They can find me on my website, turnaroundip.com, and IP is like intellectual property. Or, LinkedIn, you can find me also.
Excellent. Ted, I want to say thank you so much. It's this conversation has been extremely intriguing, and it is also a kind of not a mind game, but it works the mind to getting the result, which speaks to what you're getting people to do, right? So,
Right.
Ted, I want to say thank you so much. I want to say thank you to Wayne Pratt, my co-host, and particularly the Knack for Business listeners. So, listen, you've just heard us kind of going back and forth and understanding things that are blocking us, and Ted kind of walks you through that process in a special way. You just kind of have to follow them. And if you're struggling with your company, it might be something that's, you're limiting yourself, and let Ted liberate you from that. You may not be wanting to go to the moon just yet, but, your company is growing.
Everything you heard today is for educational purposes only. It's not professional advice. Before you act on anything, talk to a certified expert in your area. Your accountant, your lawyer, someone who knows your situation. We share perspectives. You make the decisions. Want more? Head over to blog.knack4business.com, packed with practical episodes on AI, marketing, leadership, and growth. No fluff, just the good stuff. Subscribe while you're there. Until next time, keep building.